The smell of wet cordite and rotting flesh hangs thick in the air, sticking to the back of your throat. From the bottom of a waterlogged crater on the Shuri Line, the world is nothing but brown sludge and gray sky. Private Eugene Sledge stares at the muck. Half buried in the filth is another Marine. The body is bloated, sinking into the foul water. But the dead man's hands are still locked tight around a rusted M1 rifle. This is not the quick island hop the brass promised. It is a filthy, grinding meat grinder. Your boots weigh 10 pounds each from the clay. Your stomach is empty. You look at the dead kid in the water and wonder how a campaign that started with so many smiles turned into this bottomless pit of despair. How did we end up in this hellhole? April 1st, 1945. 300 warships, 1,130 support vessels, 100,000 artillery shells screaming over our heads, tearing the beaches apart. The brass in the rear looked at their maps and told us to write our letters home. They predicted we would take heavy casualties just trying to get our boots wet. But when 50,000 Marines and Army doughboys stepped off the landing craft onto the Okinawa sand, there was no gunfire, no artillery, just the sound of waves. We walked inland, waiting for the ambush. We captured the Kadena and Yontan airfields without sweating through our fatigues. By the end of the day, out of all those men, only 55 were dead or missing. Sledge and the boys from his unit looked around, confused. Then the tension broke. Guys started laughing, joking, lighting up cigarettes. We thought the Japanese had looked at our massive fleet and decided to run for the hills. A 17-year-old Japanese ammo carrier named Yagi Sei admitted later that the huge size of our fleet made the outcome seem obvious. We felt like we had already won. We were walking tall, thinking this was going to be a walk in the park. The sun was shining. The beaches were quiet. We were alive. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, you could not help but look at the dark tree line ahead. The silence felt too heavy. Were they really running scared? Or were they just waiting for us to step a little closer into the dark? A forward scout keyed his radio and whispered, "They are shooting at us, but there is nobody on this hill." By April 4th, we were humping our heavy gear through the Chitan Neck, pushing toward the Kakazu Ridge. We expected the usual routine. We expected wild banzai charges, screaming soldiers running at us with bayonets fixed. Instead, we got a dead, heavy silence that made the hair on your arms stand up. A point man took a step, and a single sniper bullet dropped him face first in the dirt. No muzzle flash, no sound. The enemy was completely invisible, dug deep into the coral rock. We called it into the command post. The officers sitting safely on the ships miles away dismissed it. They told us over the radio that it was just scattered resistance, a few lost stragglers who did not get the memo to retreat. They ordered us to keep moving forward. So we did. We slipped in the damp clay, watching our buddies get picked off one by one from caves we could not even see. The dirt started to stick to our combat boots, making every step heavier than the last. The easy optimism from the landing beach was gone, replaced by a cold, hard knot in the gut. We were taking fire from every angle, yet we had not seen a single living Japanese soldier. The brass kept telling us the island was practically ours. If these were just disorganized stragglers, why was every single enemy machine gun dialed into the soil with perfect precision? Up in the sky, the Navy had all the radar and steel in the world, yet they could not stop a wooden plane. By April 6th, the sky broke apart. Out on the water, sailor J. Holmes stood on the deck of the destroyer Hadley and watched the kamikazes drop from the clouds. They were coming in 10 at a time. The fleet threw up a wall of anti-aircraft fire that blackened the sky. But the flaming planes kept coming, crashing into the decks and turning ships into floating coffins. Down in the mud, things were just as bad. We were stuck at the Kakazu, Nishibaru, and Tombstone ridges. Every yard cost us blood. The Japanese were not just shooting at us, they were trying to break our minds. Colonel Yahara ordered his men to drop human waste onto our foxholes to humiliate and sicken the doughboys trapped below. You could not escape the smell. You could not escape the noise. We were pinned down in the filth, listening to the distant rumble of the naval guns and the high-pitched whine of suicide planes diving into the sea. The great battleship Yamato was supposedly steaming our way, though the Navy boys sank it before it got close. Still, the pressure was crushing. There was no safe rear area. Whether you were standing on a steel deck or crouching in a muddy hole, death was coming straight for you, and it did not care about your heavy armor or your naval guns. The volume of incoming fire felt less like a battle and more like an execution. Where were they finding so many men willing to throw their lives away with such fanatical purpose? How do you fight a war when the people you are trying to save think you are a literal demon? By mid-May, the bitter truth sank in. We were not just fighting the Japanese 32nd Army. We were fighting a deeply ingrained idea. As we pushed deeper into the island, we found civilians hiding in the damp, dark caves. We expected them to surrender. Instead, we found families who had been told by their own soldiers that American Marines were monsters who would torture them. Corporal Dan Lawler looked at the starving kids and said, "We gave them candy, but they refused to touch it unless one of us took a bite first." You could see the pure panic in their eyes. The military had drafted the local Home Guard, pulling in 17,000 to 20,000 civilians. Worse, they brought in the Blood and Iron Student Corps. Kids. A 14-year-old boy named Oshiro Kenki was sitting in a dark cave right in front of us. His commanders had handed him a grenade and told him not to pull the pin until he could see the whites of an American soldier's eyes. We were farm boys from Ohio and Texas, staring down the barrels of our rifles at children willing to blow themselves to pieces just to take one of us with them. The rules of engagement we learned in basic training meant nothing in this dirt. This was not a military defense. It was a mass sacrifice. What do you do when the enemy would rather die in the dark than take a piece of chocolate from your hand? June 18, 1945. One incoming artillery shell. One dead three-star general. The cold, greasy taste of canned rations turns to ash in your mouth. A group of exhausted, mud-caked Marines are sitting near a forward observation post, quietly eating their cold chow. The constant thud of artillery is just background noise now. Suddenly, a pair of medics comes rushing past, carrying a stretcher heavy with a bleeding body. The grunts stop chewing. They just stare. The man on the canvas is not some unlucky private who poked his head out of a foxhole. It is Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner, the commander of the American 10th Army. The man running this entire island campaign. A Japanese artillery shell just ripped his chest apart while he was standing at the observation post. Nobody says a word. There is no dramatic music playing in our heads, just the squelch of the medic's boots in the dirt and the creak of the wooden stretcher. We watch the general get carried away like a sack of wet sand. The illusion of control evaporates in that single moment. The brass in Washington can draw all the neat lines on their maps they want, but out here, the shrapnel does not care about the stars on your collar. Death is entirely blind on this island. The silence among the men is heavy and suffocating. We just look back down at our dirty hands and cold food. If the most powerful man on this rock can die bleeding in the dirt, what is the life of a frontline doughboy actually worth? Cho turned to his staff in the underground bunker and asked, "Is now a good time to cut my belly?" By late June, the sour smell of napalm and flamethrower fuel was finally starting to fade. The Japanese lines at the Kian Peninsula had crumbled. General Ushijima and General Cho had committed ritual suicide, leaving behind a poetic farewell about their souls flying to heaven. Up on the surface, there was no poetry, just a butcher's bill that made you sick to your stomach. We sat in the dirt, cleaning our weapons, and listened to the numbers roll in. 4,600 Army boys were never going home. 3,000 Marines were gone. Out on the water, the Kamikazes had claimed 4,900 sailors. The Navy took its highest casualties since Pearl Harbor. And the enemy? 66,000 Japanese soldiers lay dead in the caves and ridges. The heaviest cost fell on the people who actually lived here. Up to 140,000 Okinawan civilians were wiped out. A third of the island's population erased. The fighting was over, but nobody was cheering. There were no parades in the mud, no brass bands playing back home. Just a hollow, ringing silence in your ears and the metallic click of a rifle bolt sliding home. We had taken the rock. We had captured the ruined Shuri Castle and the destroyed harbor of Naha. But as you looked out over the endless miles of blasted coral and flooded craters, wiping the grime from your face, you had to ask yourself a dark question. We won the battle, but what did we actually inherit besides a massive, blood-soaked graveyard? Why would an army fight to the last man for a piece of ground they knew they could never hold? Sitting in a quiet foxhole after the guns finally stopped, the dark truth hit us. The Japanese never planned to win the Battle of Okinawa. They were not fighting to push us back into the sea. They were fighting to create a gruesome math problem. Every inch of mud at Shuri, every bloody yard at Sugarloaf, Conical, and Horseshoe Hills was designed simply to bleed us dry. They wanted to make the cost of taking this one tiny island so high that the politicians back in Washington would choke on the casualty numbers. The invisible snipers, the endless waves of kamikazes, the civilians hiding in caves with grenades. It was all part of a calculated strategy to send a very clear message. If we dared to launch an amphibious invasion of the Japanese home islands, we should expect to pay with 1 million American casualties. We realized with a bitter taste in our mouths that we were just pawns in a giant, ruthless equation. The enemy purposely sacrificed their own people, their own children, just to show us the price of admission to their homeland. The fanaticism was not just blind loyalty. It was a deliberate weapon forged in the fires of desperation. We survived the meat grinder, pulling our boots out of the muck one last time, but a cold dread settled deep in our bones. We looked at the horizon toward the mainland. If this 82-day slaughter was just the enemy's opening warning shot, what kind of hell was waiting for us on the beaches of Japan? The rough wood of the M1 rifle stock feels cold in your hands as you rub the oil into the steel. It is August 1945. You sit on a crate on the coast of Okinawa, quietly counting down the days until you have to step onto another landing craft. Everyone knows the invasion of the Japanese mainland is coming. Everyone knows it is a death sentence. The ghosts of the 66,000 Japanese soldiers we just buried guarantee it. Then, a crackling field radio nearby catches your attention. The newsman's voice cuts through the static. He says a single, massive bomb has just been dropped on a faraway city called Hiroshima. You stop wiping the rifle. The wind blows off the Pacific, carrying the faint, salty smell of the ocean. There is no joy among the men, just a heavy, haunting silence. The blood soaked into the soil of Okinawa had just pushed President Truman's finger directly onto the nuclear button.